and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us in our discussion today. How does art serve as an archive for collective memory in the Gulf? My name is منار الهنائي, and I'm the co-founder of the Khaleiji Art Museum, the first digital museum dedicated to showcasing and exhibiting arts from the Arab Gulf states. I'll be moderating today's discussion with Sharifa الهنائي, who is the artist behind the invisible guest, the art piece we're actually seated on, a thought-provoking installation debuting for the first time at Abu Dhabi Art. In addition to being an artist, Sharifa is a writer, the co-founder of the Khaleiji Art Museum, and for those who don't know, my wonderful sister.
Thank you, منار, for the introduction, and thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to have you, especially knowing that a number of you traveled long distances to be here, so I really appreciate it. منار, I think this is our first sister-on-sister discussion, right?
I think it is, and I wonder why we've not done this before.
That's true. We've been on a few panel discussions in the past, and we've moderated different talks, but we've never been together in this capacity where somebody's speaking and the other is moderating. I don't know the reason as well, but I'm grateful that we've reached this point in time, and I'm excited for our conversation and for your questions, so fire away.
Fantastic. Let's get right into it. Sharifa, for years, people have known you for many things. You've worn so many hats. They've known you as a writer who has written primarily cultural articles for National Geographic, CNN, العربي, the Middle East Institute, Washington, D.C., and the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, D.C., as well as a fantastic author, in my opinion, for fictional and non-fictional stories. They have also known you as the co-founding editor of Sika, a London-based publication dedicated to highlighting art, culture, and literature from the Arab to the international readers. They have also known you as the co-founder of the Khaleiji Art Museum. You have never been a visual artist at any point in your life. Why have you decided to venture into art now?
You're absolutely right. I never saw myself as an artist in the past, but I have been a supporter of art and artists. And that's one of the main reasons why we established the Khaleiji Art Museum, but we can talk a little bit more about that later. What happened was, or when this shift started of me beginning to see myself as an artist, was when the pandemic hit. It was, at that time, I was working from home, and I was also finishing up my second master's. And it was quite a stressful time, I think a lot of us would agree, and it was a very surreal time as well. And I felt that I needed a hobby to sort of take my mind off of things and to unwind and to relax. And I decided that one of these hobbies would be painting. So I began watching YouTube tutorials of, painting with acrylics, painting with oil paints. And when things started opening up shortly after, I also began to take in-person classes that taught me sort of like the basics of art, sketching, the basics of painting. And I decided on a whim as well to take classes in Arabic calligraphy. And in the process, I was really overcome by the strangest feeling. I felt that I was coming home, to a home that I didn't even know I had, to a home that I didn't even know I needed. And I started creating works of art, and common themes emerged amongst them, including absence, migration, family bonds, memory, and funnily enough, similar themes appear in my creative writing. So I guess art kind of became another outlet for me to express myself, to touch upon these themes. And it's a process that I've really been enjoying overall.
I'm sure you were asking that. So The Invisible Guest is the first installation you've ever created, the first time you've debuted your art and shared it with the general public at this scale. Tell us more about this work that we are seated on and the inspiration behind it?
So the Invisible Guests is one of the closest works of art that I've created to my heart. And really the inspiration behind it was the prompts that were shared with us by the Abu Dhabi Music and Art Foundation and Studio Salasil, who are the producers of this fantastic space. And they had asked or called for works that would speak to the theme of mutual systems and would rethink, reimagine the concept of community. And when I read those prompts, this idea of an invisible community began emerging in my mind and re-emerging again and again. And I decided to develop it further. And the Invisible Guests was thus born. So the Invisible Guest, as you can see, is a reimagining of the Arabic Majlis into a space for collective remembrance where I make absence visible. So on half of the cushions here, you'll see that there are names of individuals who formed part of the UAE community. And these are individuals that have positively impacted my life in one way, shape, or form, but they've since sadly either migrated from the country, as happens often, or passed away. And I consider death to be a form of migration from this life to the next. I wrote all of the names and the descriptions by hand using the naskh form of Arabic calligraphy, which is most associated with usage in the Holy Quran. And really this work is a tribute to them. It's a way for me to honor them. And it's an invitation for all of us to think about the endurance of loss, the endurance of connection, I apologize, the weight of loss and how those who've formed a part of our lives continue to inhabit the spaces that we live in.
I'm sure maybe this is a question that crosses some of our guests' mind, but how did you choose who to be featured?
Well, it was a process that was simple and complex at the same time. So I remember getting a piece of paper and a pencil and just listing down all the names of people who have formed part of the UAE community that have positively influenced me in some way. And the list kept getting longer and longer and longer, which was something that I didn't expect. And at some point I had to narrow it down simply for, practical purposes. I'm only allowed naturally a small space or as allocated space to showcase my work. So I ended up narrowing it down to 6 names, and there are names that some of you might recognize immediately, like the late Tariq Al-Ghassain, the Palestinian photographer who left fantastic photographs and emotional ones and really impactful ones. There's also Osha Suwaidi, who is one of the UAE's most celebrated poets. And there's also Ahmed Umar over there. He is, some of you might recognize, the founding editor-in-chief of Majallat Majid, which is a magazine that I used to read a lot when I was younger, and I think it really influenced my love or led to my love for writing and contributed to me later entering the world of publishing as well. And there are names that you won't necessarily know. These are people who aren't famous, but they've had an impact on my life, a deep impact. And they all form this majlis together. And so it's, like I said, it wasn't an easy process. It was quite difficult actually, because I had to come to terms with the fact that every act of remembering is really an act of forgetting as well, inherently. And every act of inclusion is also an act of exclusion. And I also had to come to terms with the fact that I couldn't archive everybody, that this installation couldn't hold everybody in the end as much as I would have loved it to.
That's interesting that you mentioned archiving. Do you consider your work as a sort of a record or an archive? I
do see it as being a sort of archive, but but not an archive in the traditional sense. So it's my kind of archive isn't static. It's quite and it's quite emotional, I would say, and it's quite interpretive as well. So this installation is a commemorative work. It documents people who've been a part of the UAE community, but it is also an archive for emotion, for the feelings that loss and absence sort of evoke. And really, my intention is for everybody to sit in the installation, to look at it, to walk through it and around it, and think about the invisible guests that have formed a part of their lives and that have shaped their lives and shaped who they've become as well.
Sharifa, how do you think, or how does artistic practice engage with memory beyond simple documentation?
I believe that art can turn remembrance into an experience, or that it does turn remembrance into an experience. With documentation, what you have is that things are recorded in many ways the way they are, but with art, artists ask how things felt, how things in the past, events in the past, really felt. So artists translate emotions, they translate perspectives into things that can be visually seen, things that can be touched, sometimes smelled, and in the case of this installation, really inhabited. And they reimagine memory, and they create works that lead people to remember in their own way. So in summary, I think that artistic engagement moves beyond documentation to make the past something that is felt continually in the present and reinterpreted and refelt again and again.
That's interesting. So if we take that point, in our increasingly digital world, how do you see technology transforming or challenging what an archive could be or could look like?
I think when it comes to technology, it's allowing us in many ways to reimagine what an archive is. I mean, particularly when we're thinking about social media, for example. I've witnessed, and I'm sure people have witnessed as well, that this emergence of archives on Instagram, on Twitter, and or X, and these kinds of archives, a lot of them, they live exclusively on social media, or in some cases, they at least had their start on social media. And this means that there's this democratization of the archive. There's this movement to make archives more community-led, more participatory. There are great examples out there, such as Archiving the Now or the Middle East Archive. And it's really interesting to see that people are filling gaps where they see them. And I think there's a lot to admire about this.
Speaking of filling the gaps, you and I, when we founded the Khaleej Art Museum back in 2020 to fill a gap, we saw when it came to presenting art from the region on a global scale and reflecting the evolving identity of the region. How do you see the museum's role within the broader ecosystem of collective memory in the Gulf?
I think you'd agree with me when I say that I see us as forming a part of a bigger ecosystem or a growing ecosystem of institutions, artists, collectives, and communities that are shaping the way that we tell the story of the region in its own voice. But at the same time, having said that, I would say that what makes us distinct as the Khaleiji Art Museum is that we really center the Khaleiji experience through our institution. And we hope that through the Khaleiji Art Museum to be a sort of living archive through the exhibitions and collaborations and the partnerships that we hold, to be a living archive of that reflects the dynamism and the diversity that is Gulf life, and to sort of be a bridge between tradition and modern identity by, capturing or seeking works that capture artists' responses to what is really rapid social and cultural transformation in the region.
One question that you and I have received a lot through the last 5 years is that how do you decide what moments, what stories, or artists become part of the museum? And I think now is a great time to address that, Sharifa.
Sure. We are, I would say, we consider ourselves to be a living institution, a living museum, and I think we're guided less by sort of fixed criteria and more by unfolding conversations, dialogue between us as founders, between us and the team, between us and partners and artists and community members as well. And I think a lot of the time we're also inspired by the moments. I mean, our first exhibition, if we were to go back to that, our first ever exhibition was Khaligi's in the time of Corona. And it was a digital exhibition that brought together 15 emerging and established artists. And it captured their responses to a moment where it seemed like the whole world had paused, and to a time that was uncertain as well. And it also captured the responses of the region to this. And I remember us getting, I think, around 10,000 visitors to the digital exhibition in our first month. And I think that's a significant number because at that time we were not very known as, as founders, as an institution as well. So I think it really speaks to the importance of institutions responding to the things that are happening around them. But also, in addition to that, generally speaking, we look for works that, speak to the emotional and cultural landscape of the region, that speak to collective memory. We seek to bring in diverse voices as well. Because the story of our region is one that is plural and it should be told in multiple formats, I believe, and in multiple ways.
Absolutely. Do you often think about whose memories are being preserved and who might risk being left out? And how can, if we're speaking broadly, how can institutions ensure they reflect the diversity of voices across gender, nationality, and generation?
Yes, definitely. This is something that I think about constantly because institutions are really shaped by the choices that they make. And we have to be really conscious about whose voices are included and whose voices are excluded. In the end, we can't, practically include everybody, of course, but what we can do is that we can keep widening the circle to include as many voices as possible and to really allow people and communities to shape the way that their own stories are told.
I absolutely agree. Sharifa, as the Gulf continues to evolve, what kind of stories do you feel most urgently need to be recorded or reimagined through art?
For me, I'm really interested in the personal histories of people, of families. I think that they can easily be lost in this time of quick change, and they can easily be overshadowed by bigger narratives or larger narratives or louder narratives. So I'm really interested in capturing those sort of like intimate histories and intimate memories. Yeah. What about you?
I think it's something close to what you just mentioned. Interested, amidst all of the chaos and, if you're going to look at ourselves, Sharifa, a lot of things have changed throughout our lifetime. And this is the same for so many people, but like, what about the personal struggles that we go through every day that have shaped who we have become? And if there was a way to document that artistically, it's something like I'd love to see or be part of.
Definitely, I'd be interested in seeing that.
Sharifa, thank you for your reflections and your insights. I think what's clear from today's conversation is that art in the Gulf does more than just capture beauty, it captures being. It's a vessel for memory, emotion, and identity. It carries forward the voices of both individuals and communities. And as our region continues to evolve, institutions like the Khaleej Art Museum remind us that remembering is an act of care and that through art, our stories continue to live. Thank you to our speaker and to everyone who joined us today. Our wonderful artist will be here. She'd love to talk to you more about her artwork if you didn't get a chance to, and to answer any question that you may have.
Thank you, منار. And like منار said, I'll be here for any questions that you might have. Thank you all for coming.